So, mesdames co-chairs, that's rather awkward, isn't it? Esteemed colleagues, ladies, gentlemen, friends, good afternoon, ni hao, bei hao ma. There's another wonderful phrase of greeting which in Cantonese is something like "Sik and sik jiao fan a," which means "Have you had your lunch?" And whenever I got asked that I listened to that when I was living in Hong Kong, and I couldn't quite understand why people were asking me in mid-afternoon why I had had my lunch. And so I said, yes, I had, actually. And I would describe my lunch, and they looked at me as if I was something very strange. Why was I talking about my lunch? But that's one of the wonders of learning foreign languages, the complexities of foreign languages. However, let's just talk about this for a moment, if I may. The question of whether you can learn Chinese and English under a single formula. That's what I've been asked to talk about. I'd like to talk about it from the publisher point of view. And could I just say to the translators that I will cut out some of the paragraphs that I have prepared here in the interest of time, because I've generously been giving my time to Mr. Wu Shulin. First of all, I see no reason for a different structure to emerge in the future than the one that we are seeing now. By that, I mean that there are broadly two types of businesses that are running language courses internationally, namely language schools and publishers. It's actually perfectly reasonable for both these types of institution to continue to generate revenues from language teaching and indeed to aim to set the standard. But there is also crossover between the two. Many language schools publish their own course books and even supply courses to other institutions. Conversely, publishers are now recognizing the benefit of vertical integration of their business into teaching and also examining the students whom they teach. That latter model is one that I believe will evolve considerably in the next 10 or 20 years as businesses become increasingly aware that the globalized world offers economic benefits of scale, and that will become important in a competitive world. It is therefore entirely natural that what I might call full-service organizations should emerge over time, and there is already clear evidence of major publishers who are going down that route and indeed seeking to dominate global education. But I won't mention any names. Of course, there will always be a place for specialist niche players, and they will enjoy their proper place in the overall scheme of things. But the big conglomerates will be able to provide increasingly attractive services from the point of view of cost, but also they will be able to afford to develop well-researched and well-practiced models for all of these elements of the educational continuum. Now, given that kind of scenario, I would be prepared to bet my pension fund on the... Who's laughing at that? My pension fund, yeah. I shall be there very soon. On the international publishers as being the ones who are most likely to succeed. But I'm sure that I will be challenged by someone on that point. Now, as regards the nature of the courses, I don't propose to dwell on that question. Martin Davison, when he was speaking earlier, pointed to the reality, I believe, that there will be a combination of printed material and digital material, and it'll be a shifting combination over time. I don't think that the teaching population is quite ready yet to move directly from print to digital material, so this will be a developing scenario. But what is of much greater interest to me is whether Chinese language teaching is going to be amenable to widespread international dissemination in the same way that English language teaching has been. I'm going to suggest that the answer to that is no, that it will be a much more complex proposition, but that is mainly because Chinese is a far more difficult subject to learn for the non-Chinese speaking world. At the root of the problem is, of course, written Chinese, with its 68,000, was it, pictograms in this dictionary. But these are creatures, these pictograms, that are so alien to the rest of mankind and which are so difficult to learn, not least because they're not phonetic, and therefore one cannot pronounce what one sees. I should know, because I came into daily contact with written Chinese 35 years ago, and still I'm struggling. At a minimum, the acquisition of a sufficient number of Chinese characters, which is perhaps 3,000 to 4,000, to enable one to function competently in the Chinese language, will require significantly longer than the acquisition of the Roman alphabet, 26 characters, and consequent competence in English vocabulary. In turn, that tells me that the student of Chinese language must be far more committed to learning Chinese than the student of English, because he or she will probably need to work 3 times as many hours in the early stages in order to make progress. And that's actually a very hard task. So then, if you think about a single language school trying to teach Chinese and English, you also have to think about how that will work when one group will probably need 3 times as many hours of instruction as the other group. So, cutting up another chunk of my text here, what this says to me is that there is no obvious synergy between Chinese language teaching and English language teaching, except for the fact that both those activities could be carried out in the same physical or virtual environments. The one caveat, again, is about managing the expectations of the students of Chinese. They should not imagine that they will be able to complete their courses and become proficient in both spoken and written Chinese in as short a time as students of the English language. I am reminded of an incident in 1979 when my wife and several other new recruits to the Hong Kong government, and I think I see one of them sitting right there in the form of Mr. Davison, were taught Cantonese for several months before being sent out into the field to work within Cantonese-speaking populations. One of the recruits, during her first week in a district office in the islands, had to make a speech in Cantonese at the opening ceremony for a new village library. At the end of the ceremony, there was enthusiastic applause for her efforts. But as she left the venue with her Chinese executive officer, she asked if he had understood her, and indeed, if they had understood her. He replied that she had made a brave effort, but nobody had understood a single word, because all her tones were wrong. But, she said, they seemed to applaud so enthusiastically. Ah, yes, he said, but that's because I warned them at the beginning that you would be incomprehensible and that they should simply applaud loudly when you stopped speaking. Now that, I have to tell you, was after 5 months intensive Cantonese teaching. I rest my case. Chinese is always going to be a far more difficult and different proposition than English language teaching. So thank you, 谢谢，唔該晒你話，thank you.